Hi, alternates. You're probably joining us right after opening statements. And that's perfect because on Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025, day one of the Karen Reed retrial, the Commonwealth, or as I'll sometimes call them, the prosecution, called their first two witnesses. So let's start with the very first, 28-year-old firefighter and paramedic Timothy Nuttall. Timothy has been with the Canton Fire and EMS since graduating from high school in 2015. He started at the bottom, worked his way up, and is now a full-fledged paramedic. He was one of the first responders on scene at 34 Fairview Road, the location where, you might recall, John O'Keefe's body was found. When Timothy arrived, visibility was poor. He recalled seeing, or more accurately, hearing, 3 women speaking with the Canton police. He followed the voices and then saw a man lying on his back in the snow, roughly 6 feet from the sidewalk. Timothy knelt at the victim's head and checked for a pulse on both sides of the neck. Feeling nothing, he made a quick determination that there were no signs of life. Timothy started to question the women nearby, asking if they knew the man. And at that point, another EMT named Anthony called Timothy back. Anthony believed that this could be a workable cardiac arrest, meaning that they had to try to raise the victim's core body temperature before calling it, Timothy returned to the body. Now, Anthony, it should be noted, was the lead paramedic at this point. So when Timothy returned to the body, which we now know was Boston police officer John O'Keefe, he began airway checks. Now, this moment and much of what unfolded was captured on police cruiser dashcam video, which was introduced at trial with Timothy's testimony. That footage shows what appears to be 3 women, EMTs tending to John, and eventually John being loaded onto a stretcher and carried away. Now, here's where things get complicated. Timothy testified that while he and 2 other paramedics were working on John, Karen Reed approached him and said, quote, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him," end quote. But under cross-examination, defense attorney Alan Jackson challenged that statement because Timothy had testified to this fact twice before today. And one was at the grand jury hearing and then again at a hearing in 2024. And Timothy had only testified back then that Karen said, "I hit him twice." Now, on the stand in 2025, he was saying that it happened 3 times. Jackson leaned in, asking, would your memory have been more accurate back then, closer to the actual event? And Timothy was a little bit stumbled on the stand. He couldn't give a clear answer initially, but then he conceded that his memory was better now than it was back then, which really doesn't make any sense. And that's what I would be thinking if I was a juror. Then came a reference to Detective Michael Proctor's report. At this point, Timothy tried to distance himself from the content, saying basically, "I don't know what Proctor wrote. I'm not sure if it's even what I said." So the defense highlighted several inconsistencies and credibility issues in Timothy's testimony, including that he had previously claimed that John was wearing a puffy coat when found, but in reality, John was wearing a short-sleeved shirt with no jacket, which was completely inappropriate for the snowy conditions. He also had testified at 2 previous hearings, like I stated, the grand jury and the 2024 hearing, and on both occasions, he gave slightly different versions of events. The defense also pointed out that Timothy had met with the prosecutor 3 times in just the past 3 weeks, with the most recent meeting taking place the night before trial. And those meetings, well, they all centered on whether Karen Reed said, "I hit him" 2 times or 3 times. And one major point that the defense drove home was that Karen Reed was allegedly praying over John at the scene. Timothy had apparently made this claim previously, but under oath on this day, he basically said, "I never saw her do that. I never said that she did." Finally, through Timothy's testimony, the defense also introduced a photo of John's right arm, which appeared to be scratched up. Now, there was some back and forth in court about whether to call it a scratch or an abrasion or something else. It was a very small detail, but one the defense used to basically highlight the uncertainty and the lack of clarity in the prosecution's case. So, to sum up day one's, Timothy Nuttall's testimony placed Karen Reed at the scene. It made it appear as if she was somewhat remorseful and possibly also incriminating herself at the same time. But the inconsistencies in his statements over time and the last-minute prosecution prep, well, it gave the defense ample material to challenge this witness's credibility. And that was just the first witness. Once Timothy was excused from the witness stand, the Commonwealth called Kerry Roberts as their next witness. But before she started to testify, the prosecution introduced a piece of evidence. It's a video of Karen Reed during an ID docuseries dated in June of 2024. During the Karen Reed clip, basically, she says that she's heard things so many times that she can't even remember if she's actually said certain things or whether she's just adopted those statements as true after hearing them so often. Okay, so let's get into Kerry Roberts' testimony. Kerry is a key witness to the unfolding chaos on the morning that John was found. Kerry Roberts is a Canton resident. She's a wife, a mother of 2 teens, and an executive assistant. She's known John O'Keefe since they were kids. Back in high school, John was a year ahead of her, and they both played soccer. But as adults, their friendship seemed to deepen when John's sister and brother-in-law passed away, and that was when Carrie stepped in to help with John's niece and nephew, doing things like neighbors do, preschool pickups, offering parenting advice, even listing John as her kid's emergency contact. Basically, they did life together. Carrie and her family were among the many in the Canton community who wrapped their arms around John after tragedy, and their arms stayed there. But nothing could have prepared Carrie for what she woke up to on the morning of January 29th, 2022. It should be noted that Carrie did say that she was friendly with Karen after meeting her. I think she met in the summer of 2020, but she didn't go as far as to call Karen Reed a friend. Anyway, on January 28th, Carrie's husband actually went to McCarty's with John, but her husband was home by 10:30 p.m.-ish. In any event, she was in bed by midnight, but she was awakened by an early morning phone call. At around 5 a.m., Carrie's phone rang. The name that popped up was Karen Reed, a woman who I stated was friendly with Carrie, but not necessarily her friend. Anyway, Carrie answered. On the other end, she heard Karen screaming, quote, "Carrie, Carrie, Carrie, John's dead," end quote, and then the call ended. Karen was yelling so loudly over the phone that Carrie's husband could hear her voice across the bed.
I got a phone call at 5 o'clock in the morning from Karen Reed.
Were you expecting a call?
No, I was not.
Had you ever received a call at 5 in the morning from Miss Reed before?
No.
Share with us what happened that morning. What did you hear?
Karen called, and the first thing she said was, Carrie, 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 John's dead. And then she hung up.
Well, she called you again. Did you have another discussion, or did you hear her say something else the second time you spoke to her?
Yes, the second time she said, I think something happened to John. I think he got hit by a plow. He didn't come home last night. Kaylee was home. He would never leave her by herself, and I was not supposed to stay at the house last night. So I think something happened to him.
Did she say anything about drinking?
Yes, she said, we drank so much, I don't remember anything from last night. And I said, okay, where are you now? She said, I'm driving. And I said, you need to go home. Where's Kaylee? And she said, at home. I said, you need to go home and be with Kaylee. She cannot handle this, thinking, her uncle's missing. I said, you're going to get a DUI. You need to go home.
Was there anything else in the conversation that she said to you at that time?
She said, I'm going to drive to your house. Would you drive my car? And I said, yes. So at that point, I started to get dressed. I turned on the automatic car starter so it would warm up. Told my husband, I don't know what's going on. John didn't come home. And so I think my husband tried to call him, and I tried to call him. And my husband said, you're not going anywhere. It's a blizzard. He's probably on somebody's couch. And I was like, I know, but she's really upset. I'm just going to go. She wants to come here. I'm going to drive her car. And then I went out to my car and sat and waited for her.
Shocked and confused, Kerry tried calling Karen back, but to no avail. When they finally reconnected, she couldn't remember when or how, Karen added more information. Quote, I think something happened to John. I think he got hit by a plow, end quote. Karen told Kerry that she was on her way to her house, so Kerry got dressed and went to wait in her car. As Kerry sat there, she tried to make sense of what the hell was happening. And as she waited, she called the non-emergency police line. She also called the hospital, anywhere that might have news about John. She told the dispatcher, basically, my friend says her boyfriend didn't come home last night. He's a Boston police officer. This isn't like him. But the dispatcher told her that there were no reports. But Karen never arrived. I do want to point out that that phone call from Kerry to the 911 non-emergency line was presented at the trial. However, I did want to play it for you, but it was really just kind of hard to hear. But you can just tell that Kerry's voice, she's like concerned, but not overly concerned yet. So let's go back to the point where Kerry is waiting in her car for Karen, and then Karen never arrives. Kerry basically calls Karen and is like, where are you? I'm waiting for you. But Karen basically tells her, hey, I didn't head your way. I headed to Jen McCabe's house, and now I'm here with her. Now, Jen McCabe is another person who Kerry isn't really familiar with. She barely knew her. But Kerry drove to Jen McCabe's house herself. When she arrived, Karen and Jen were inside of Karen's SUV, but Karen was in the passenger seat. Kerry said Karen immediately pointed out, quote, my taillight's broken, end quote. Kerry didn't think much of it at the time. Now, I should add that I was a little bit confused because if Karen was in her SUV, how would she have been pointing to her taillight? But that issue was not made clear through this testimony. At this point, the women decided to go to John's house to search for him. Jen pulled Karen's car in first, and Kerry followed behind in her vehicle. They entered through the garage, but the interior door was locked. Kerry said that she searched the first floor, Karen went upstairs, and Jen McCabe went to go check on the teenage daughter, and there was no sign of John. Karen then wanted to go to the house. It should be noted that when they were still sitting at Jen McCabe's house in the driveway, there was a discussion about what they were going to do. Now, during this discussion, Karen Reed said something to the effect of, I left after the waterfall. And Jen immediately was like, no, you didn't. I saw you pull up to my sister's house. At which point, Karen was like, okay, then let's go search for John at your sister's house. But Kerry chimed in and was like, no, absolutely not. Let's go to John's house because no one has checked there. According to Karen, she hadn't checked. No one has checked there, and he could actually just be home. So that's where they headed. So after searching the house and finding nothing, they piled into Kerry's car. Karen sat in the back seat. She was panicked, completely frantic, rocking forward, pressing herself between, the driver's seat and the passenger seat. And then she just kept falling back. She was acting like just a frantic child. Jen navigated as they drove through the snow towards Fairview Road. And that was the home of the Alberts. Kerry said that the snow was making the road slippery. She was so nervous that she was gripping the wheel for dear life. Karen wasn't even wearing her seatbelt. At some point, someone mentioned Bella's mom, a woman that Kerry didn't know. There's a lot of people that Kerry doesn't know. Anyway, Karen said something like, Bella's mom never liked me. During her statement, Kerry also testified that she didn't know Bella's mom, but that she did know that her and John had dated, and that Bella's mom lived near the Alberts' home. So as I was listening to this testimony, you could just tell that the situation in the car was a little bit chaotic. The conversations are going from here to there, and it's just all over the place. So as they approach 34 Fairview Road, everything changed. Karen screamed, quote, there he is, let me the fuck out of this car, end quote. Kerry unlocked the door. Karen bolted toward a snowbank, and Kerry looked at Jen and said, she's crazy. You see, Kerry hadn't seen anything at first, but then she looked harder, and there was the unmistakable shape of a human body buried in the snow. All right, everyone, that's where court ended today. Tomorrow, we expect Kerry Roberts to continue her direct examination, picking up right where she left off at the moment they discovered John O'Keefe's body. This is The Alternate, inside America's biggest trials. I am your co-host, Margot. Join us tomorrow for day 2, and stay tuned because we might actually start streaming the trial on our very own YouTube channel. Make sure you follow us on YouTube at Alternate Pod. Note that it doesn't say the.